guys, I am Josh Friedel for chesslecture.com, and today I'll be showing you why bishops are superior to rooks. And in doing so, I'm going to be showing the game Yermolinsky Friedel from the Northern California Championship, which was not this past weekend, but the weekend before that. It's a very interesting tourney. I ended up tying for first with Yermo, and I actually took the tourney on tiebreaks, so technically I'm Northern California champion now, which is sort of interesting considering I just got here. But anyhow, my game against Yermo was my only loss of the tournament, and it was also the most interesting and instructive game in my opinion. So, it went, Yermo was white, I was black, d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3. Very, very common move order these days. Basically, white avoids the Nimzo Indian, which black scores very well in, by playing this knight f3 move. Now, there are lots of options for black. One is d5, which often goes into queen's gambit decline positions, or Rogozin. There's b6, which transposes usually into queen's Indian. And there's c5, which is a very ambitious move, which often transposes into either Benoni or Blumenfeld. And c5 is what I played. Now, d5 is the most ambitious option, which Yermo plays. Knight c3 and g3 are other moves which are a bit more timid, and although they're not without some sting, black usually scores okay against those. So, Yermo played d5. Now, interestingly enough, this is the second time I've had this against him in 2 weeks. In the other game, I played e takes d5 here, followed by d6. And after that, he played e4, which was a rather annoying move. And the idea being, let me play it on the board quickly. So there went cd, ed, cd, d6, and now e4. And the idea being, if knight takes e4, queen a4 check wins the knight. And here, I played a6, he played bishop d3, and it was like a regular Benoni, except he didn't commit his knight to c3, so the b5 move certainly doesn't do as much, because b4 is never a threat. And eventually what happened was, he got in both a4, h3, knight c3, and it was a somewhat uncomfortable position. And actually he put his knight on d2, and I got into a worse position, and although I drew, my opening position was certainly not what I wanted. So, going back here, in order to avoid that, I played d6 here. b5 is another interesting option, the Blumenfeld, which I've also played on a few occasions. Certainly a very interesting line, but against Yermo, I really didn't want to do that right now. So, d6, knight c3, e takes d5, c takes d5. So now it's transposed, and his knight's committed to c3. And with d6, there's really no loss. So, to me, it's a slightly more accurate move order than taking on d5 immediately. So I play g6. He plays e4. Again, the most ambitious move. Yermo is certainly not one who shies away from any type of complications or aggressive lines. He'll almost always play what's most punishing, aggressive, whichever. a6, which is, in my opinion, the more accurate move. Although bishop g7 is also possible, probably more popular, I think a6 is more promising. The idea being that now bishop g4 is threatened straight away, which could be very annoying. Like if a4 now, for example, bishop g4, and black tends to have fewer opening problems than if white was allowed to play h3 beforehand. The other possibility, h3, now allows b5. So basically, with the move a6 before bishop g7, you guarantee that either you get in b5 or bishop g4, both of which are certainly accomplishments for black. So in my opinion, this is the most accurate move order to play the Benoni. However, bishop g7, the main line, is certainly playable, although these days it's certainly not doing very well. So he played bishop d3, bishop g7, castles, all normal, a3. A slightly rare move order, although it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. I played rook e8, rook e1, which is now pretty much transposed to what is normally played. Rook a7. move may look very bizarre, but in these days is considered one of the main and most dangerous move orders for black. The idea being, I immediately get a rook to e7, putting pressure on e4. And this does a lot of things. First of all, b4 is always up in the air then, threatening to simply win the pawn. Knight e2 to g3, which can be a very dangerous transfer of the knight, and which can give white a serious attacking chances often, is totally out of the picture because knight e2 will always be answered by knight takes e4. So this move order is, again, in my opinion, I think it's probably black's best. However, often played by very good players. De Vermeyen is a big aficionado on the black side of this, and he plays it with simply knight bd7 and bishop b7. Certainly nothing too wrong with that. However, because of the lack of pressure on e4, it gives white more options. So, Yermo played bishop f4, rook a e7, and now with the pressure on e4, he has more problems than he would otherwise, in my opinion, because he can't transfer the knight. You know, it makes it a little bit harder for white to develop everything. So, in this position, he played queen d2. Rook c1 and rook b1 are also alternatives, but this move certainly is nothing wrong with it. And now, I thought briefly about b4, but decided that after ab4, cb4, knight a4, knight e4, queen b4, I'd be in a lot of trouble because both of my knights are attacked. And although I have this somewhat saving move, bishop f5, g4 would quickly take care of that, and I'm in lots of trouble. So, instead, I play queen b6, which is certainly a more normal move. And now b4. Incidentally, instead of queen b6, c4 was an alternative, which at first he thought was better, but after the game we decided that what I played was probably fine too. And knight bd7. So here he plays a somewhat new move, rook a b1. And this move, in my opinion, is very, very clever. The idea being, he's simply going to play a4. And what's going to end up happening is we're going to liquidate some pawns on the queen side, and I'm going to have a very, very weak either a6 or b5 pawn, and he's going to have the very healthy e4 pawn, which, although I have some pressure on, I'm certainly not going to win anytime soon. So a4 is actually a very serious problem here. So I played queen c7. Now a4 is really not an issue, because without the pin, I can just take on a4, and it's really nothing. So he plays rook bc1, and I played my queen back to b6. There really is no other suitable square. I do not want to stay on this file, because a4 again could be a problem. And otherwise, I really don't have anything too productive to do besides bishop b7. So really, there's not much else to do. And now he plays bishop e3. Again, a very annoying pin. I certainly don't want to allow a4, so queen b8. So notice how I'm doing a little queen dance, which is very, very common in Benoni. The idea being, I'm simply moving my queen off of the pins. And there's no real great way for white to keep pinning one of my pawns onto my queen, which is, again, very, very annoying. So, although it looks like I'm sort of at his mercy here, there's really not a whole lot he can do, because, if he can't do anything, I'm still going to play bishop b7 and slowly improve my position. And what can he do? Because of my rooks on e8 and e7, I have so much pressure on e4 that he's really not allowed to do much. So, in this position, he decided to go for a somewhat risky plan. Rook b1, queen c7, rook ec1. So, at first glance, it's extremely logical. Okay, the e4 pawn's defended enough, so now I'll transfer my rooks to the queen side, and his queen will have simply no squares. If I had to play queen d8 here, I'd have serious problems, due to many moves. Bishop f4 being possible, b takes c5 is probably very good. In fact, I didn't even consider it. There's only one real move I considered here, which was c4. So now that his rooks are committed to the queen side, I close it off. A very, very common thing. So you saw there was a little dance that went on. He sort of tried to maneuver for position on the queen side. I maneuver my queen out of the way of my pieces, and then only when he committed both of his rooks to the queen side did I lock it up. So bishop c2, pretty forced, and knight takes e4. This may seem like an unexpected blow, but both of us anticipated this quite a while back, and neither of us were really surprised by it. And after the game, he criticized himself for allowing this. He thinks he should have found something else earlier. However, after analyzing it for quite a bit, he couldn't really find anything that was great. So his conclusion was sort of funny, which is basically, black's okay here, you know? There was no real way for him to really punish anything I'd done. Although my position looks a little loose, just not much he can do. So here he allows this exchange sack, which, although is certainly by no means winning, is very dangerous for black and very thematic. He transferred his piece to the queen side, so now his center is a little open, so I'm going to exploit it right away. If I don't sack the exchange, I'm simply going to have a very passive position, and not a whole lot I can do. So sacking the exchange was very natural, and I played this rather quickly. Knight takes e4, rook takes e4, bishop takes e4, rook takes e4. Obviously, if he does not grab the exchange, I simply win a pawn for nothing. So here, believe it or not, this exact position's been reached before. And in that game, bishop h6 was played. And it was a very interesting draw. However, Yermolinsky played bishop d4, which after the game he criticized. But I'm not so sure it's that bad. Although it certainly leads to crazy complications, I don't think there was any way for white to really claim advantage. So this is certainly a very thematic move, trying to trade the bishops. If he can trade off one of my bishops, he's probably going to be better here. However, of course I don't allow that. I play knight e5, which at first may look like almost a blunder. Knight takes e5, d takes e5, bishop c5. All very normal. Bishop e3 would simply be a much worse version of this. Bishop on c5 makes a lot more sense. And now it looks like as though I'm in a bit of trouble. My rook on e4 is sort of stranded. My bishops aren't very well coordinated at the moment, and my extra pawn doesn't look like it's doing a whole lot, whereas he has the nice d5 pawn, which is about to go to d6. However, I had a very, very powerful shot, which I considered for probably over half an hour before rejecting it. And my reasons for rejection were not very good. Basically, I thought that if I played this move, it would be too nuts and it just wouldn't quite be enough. But really, it felt right, and I should have just gone with my gut feeling on this one. Rook d4, Topalov style, sacking two exchanges. And without this move, I'm probably simply worse. But with this move, and we looked at it after the game, I think there's a lot of chances for black. For example, bishop takes rook, forced. If he lets me take d5, I'm probably just better. And there's not a whole lot he can do anyway. So it takes. So, obviously, I'm down two exchanges now. I have a pawn for it. However, I have two very nice bishops, or at least the one on c8 is going to be very nice, and two very healthy connected passers, which, as we all know, are very dangerous at any time. And he has the d5 pawn, which is what worried me here. Without the d5 pawn, I would have played this in 2 seconds. But I thought with the d5 pawn, it would simply be too much. Add to that the open e-file with his rooks, I thought he maybe would have too much here. But in reality, I really had to go for this. Otherwise, my position's simply worse. And I definitely think this would have been interesting. For example, after the game, we were looking at this position for some time, and we couldn't really come up with anything convincing, but basically we decided that black had enough compensation here. For example, if he plays rook e1 now. So rook e8 check would obviously be way too annoying. So bishop d7 is a very plausible move, which is what he recommends, after which it's very hard to determine how he's even going to, play any moves here, because the e-file is almost all taken up. And with those connected passers, he can't really leave them alone. The d-pawn's totally complicated, so bishop d7 would be nice. I, however, probably would have played this slightly more ambitious h5. So this allows rook e8 check, And now, for example, if queen g5, bishop f5, and the game is just totally nuts. I mean, he has maybe some threats after rook e7, rook takes f7, my king's in a little bit of danger. However, I have those menacing connected pass pawns, which could make a queen potentially in a few moves. Not to mention that, his rooks are not very well coordinated, my bishops are beautiful, and it almost looks like my bishops are just better than his rooks, and I have the connected passers. So, in this position, I mean, the bishops coordinate much better than the rooks, and of course, they aren't better pieces in general, that would be very foolish, but in conjunction with connected pass pawns, two bishops pointing together, not much can beat that. So this position would have been although it's certainly not clear, I would have been very happy with this position, and this is what I should have gone for. However, I was a bit too timid, which is not usually how I play, but in this position, for some reason I chickened out on rook d4, and I shouldn't have. I played h5, which looks like a nice non-committal move. I can play rook d4 next move. However, this gives him the opportunity he needs, and a GM like Yermolinsky will only need one opportunity. So he plays d6. Now, whereas in the other line the pawn really wasn't doing much, in this line the pawn is all of a sudden very menacing, and really is a thorn. I played queen c6, rook d1, and at first I expected rook e1. I thought this was a mistake, and I said, aha, now I will sack rook d4. However, I simply missed he could sidestep. In this position there was slight time pressure on both sides, and I simply missed that he could play queen e3. And now all of a sudden things are not looking so good. And lacking in time somewhat, although it wasn't severe time trouble, I was in very slight time trouble here. However, I only had to make 30 moves, not 40. So it wasn't quite so bad. But after queen e3, I realized that I am all of a sudden in a little bit of trouble. If the rooks are traded, I can resign. Once the rooks get traded, things are just downhill very quickly for me. For example, rook takes rook takes rook. All of a sudden you notice, where's my counterplay? The c-pawn can't move. The e-pawn's useless. The d-pawn's a killer. I mean, I can practically resign right here. So, in these situations, trading is just horrible for me. Any kind of trade I want to avoid. Rook e4 looks nice. However, after queen f3, I'm a little bit tied up, which I thought would be very, very risky. And with d7 threatened, although, of course, I'd probably play bishop d7 here, this is a very, very risky position. You can probably here play rook e1, forcing the trades, and once everything gets traded off, with that d6 pawn, he's going to be in pretty good shape. The doubled pawns are almost totally inconsequential after rook e1, queen f3. But so, because of all this, in this position, I decided to play rook f4. So, obviously, a slight concession, moving my rook back, but here, he was having a notoriously hard time. He just had trouble thinking of something to do. I mean, my rook cuts off everything. True, he has a nice pass pawn and a bishop, but they can't really move. If his queen goes back to d2, I'd happily slide my rook back to d4. I am worse here, so a draw certainly I wouldn't mind. And as far as tournament situation goes, we both had 3-0, the next people were 2-0, the next people back, so a draw certainly wouldn't be so bad. So, and no problem. So he plays rook b2. He finds something productive, double the rooks, easy enough. He does it in a slightly fancy way, but probably accurate. I certainly wasn't going to check him because I didn't have much time. And I played my last move to control, bishop f5. So he plays rook bd2, pretty obvious move, yes. Doubling the rooks, but d7 is a killer threat, I have to prevent it, queen d7. Bishop b6. Yermo says I'm going to play queen c5, queen c7. So here, I thought in order to prevent this, I had to play bishop d3, which is what I played and which is a huge mistake. In this position, queen c5 is basically a bluff. I can play almost any move. For example, king h7. Now if he plays queen c5, boom, bishop takes h3. Now queen c7, queen g4 is very good for, it should be good for black. And if takes bishop, queen takes, I think he's on the verge of mate here. If f3, for instance, I can simply either play rook h4 or queen takes f3, both of which look very, very dangerous. Rook h4 probably is most accurate. And now, with queen h1 threatened, things are looking pretty grim. So, this is certainly not what he wanted. So, not being able to play queen c5, what could he do here? It's almost impossible to think of a reasonable plan. g3 weakens h3, f3 weakens g3. For example, if f3 here, h4, and now, I mean, what can he do? Now, after this, bishop here makes some sense, because if he does the exchange sack in this position, with rook takes d3, c takes d3, rook takes d3, I play either probably e4 now. And after takes f3, his king's going to be just as wide, very, very wide open, and that'll make up for the passed d-pawn. In the game, I certainly didn't get that. So going back, in this position, basically, I panicked. In the beginning, I made a good exchange sack, but in slight time trouble, and because I guess I'm a chicken, I failed to play the most accurate way to sack a second exchange. So I'm down one exchange, but I gotta keep it that way. Once I give back the exchange, everything becomes easy. And for some reason, that did not occur to me, and it got me into big trouble. So in a lot of situations, especially like this, if I keep the exchange on, obviously not trade rooks, in fact, not trade anything. Trading of any pieces here is bad. I gotta just keep white totally blocked out. And to win this, because queen c5 is answered by bishop takes h3 almost at any moment, any pawn move weakens them, this position is going to be very, very difficult to win. And even he said he had no clue how to win this after the game. He's like, why did you play this move? I have no clue how to win this. And I certainly shouldn't have. So after bishop d3, sacking the exchange back, again, watch how, once I lose my bishop to, I get a rook, I lose a bishop and pawn. Watch how quickly I go downhill here. Bishop d3, rook takes d3, which he played in 2 seconds. He snapped that thing. Like, it sounded like it was like he hadn't eaten in weeks and he got his first meal, Rook takes d3, c takes d3, queen takes d3. I was expecting rook takes for some odd reason. Queen takes is much better. Rook c4 was the key move I saw. If I let him get the c-file, I can just resign. And here I thought I maybe had some defensive chances, but I was totally off base. Once the exchange is gone, the center opens. With that d-pawn, I'm just dead. And he plays bishop c5, not letting my rook get back. And this is one of the few cases where the active rook is worse than the passive rook, because my rook's really not doing a whole lot, even though it's supposedly active in the position. It's cut off now, and his plan is simply going to be queen d5, queen a8 check, and queen a7. And then he's going to queen the d-pawn. Simple enough, huh? So here, I realized the danger. Also, he has another plan, which I feared even more, which is a4, a5, followed by this. And then I'm going to lose a6, a-pawn's going to queen, I'm just going to die. So here, I was I realized how bad my position is. I realized that much worse than I thought, and I sort of got into desperation mode, and played a5. However, it certainly didn't accomplish much. Queen d5, obviously he's not going to take and give up his bishop. AB, if a4, he plays queen check, followed by queen a7. Queen takes a7 check. Queen takes, not check, I'm sorry. Bishop takes a7. Bishop f6 and bishop d6. And he's going to queen the d-pawn, winning a piece. If rook d5, bishop a5. No way to stop it. So instead, I took on b4. AB, and I played bishop f6. Now if e4, which is the logical looking move, he can simply play queen a8 check, followed by queen a7 with the same idea. Queen takes, bishop takes, bishop f6, bishop b6. You have rook c6, bishop a5, and taking the pawn is simply not enough. And he queens, and this is a very easy win. Especially with the weak dark squares on my king side, I'm probably going to just get mated. Or at least lose several pawns. So this is a very easy win. And I would have probably resigned here against him. So I decided not to go for this. And what I played looks suicidal, and in fact is. I decided that that win would be just so easy for him, it would be like resigning. So I decided, instead of that, I'd make it so that he had to beat me by force. With bishop f6, and sometimes this is easier. For some opponents, it's easier to find a forced win. For other opponents, it's easier to win technically. Yermo is a very technical player in a lot of ways. So I figured I'd make him find a forced win, which I had no doubt he'd do, but I figured practically it was the best chance. So bishop f6, rook a1, which is what this is the drawback of this move. Doesn't lose a piece, but it allows his rook to get into the 7th, which is very bad. So e4, I have to free my bishop, otherwise I simply can't do anything. Rook a7. Rook a8 check followed by rook a7 was also strong, and probably won, but this is just as good. So I throw in rook c1 check, king h2, queen e6. And he takes it. And plays g3 to prevent bishop e5. So I play h4. So here I'm pretty much dead lost. I can't prevent d7, bishop b6, and winning a piece. So here I'm pretty much lost. We played a few more moves. He played g3. And again, this is probably unnecessary, but he wasn't playing the forced win, so I played out a few more moves. h4, gh, rook d1, king g2, stepping out of the check, rook d3, preventing his king from doing anything, although really I'm not doing a whole lot here. d7, bishop takes h4, and bishop e6, I resigned. Seeing that if king f7, d8 is with queen, and if king f8, rook a8 check, if king e7, d8, queen wins, king f7, queen, and he wins a piece. So seeing this, I resigned. And so, obviously a very tough game. Luckily, the next day I won twice, and Yermo drew twice, so I was able to catch him and beat him on tiebreaks. However, a very, very instructive game in that in some positions, not all, of course, in fact not most, but in some positions, bishops are simply better than rooks. And that, although I was down the exchange, sacking it back was basically a forced loss, and at first, I should have sacked 2 exchanges. And the 2 bishops would practically be better than his 2 rooks. Then I messed up, and I only was down 1 exchange, but I had some defensive chances, as you noticed, because the material imbalance often makes things more complicated and harder to win. It's very often the case. So, in some cases, it's better not to simplify. Even if simplifying means winning a little bit of material, it can make things much easier for your opponent. And that's what I did. I sort of panicked. I thought, oh, queen c5 to c7 was a killer idea after bishop b6. So I played bishop d3, saying, okay, give me your exchange back. But after that, the position was simply too open, his d pawn was too strong, and my position was basically dead. Although I probably could have resisted a bit longer, I was basically lost. Once he sacked back, I allowed him to sack back the exchange. So, thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next time.